Introductions.
Yeah, you could probably should make yourself a little, except everybody probably knows who you are.
So, I'll go ahead and do introductions. My name is Ted Deers, Administrator of the Hardship Management Bureau at the Department of Environmental Services. I'll let just everybody introduce themselves.
My name is Ted Fenimore. I'm the Assistant Chief Engineer at the Dam Bureau. We have a bureau that compiles the lake level investigation.
I'm Chip Gallagher, I'm Chief of the Dam Bureau.
I'm Wayne Hodgson, Stream Flow Specialist.
So, thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. We had hoped to have this meeting about 3 weeks ago, and unfortunately, we screwed up and didn't get notification out, and so we needed to reschedule, and so that's why we're here tonight. And in the meantime, we've made sure that all of the plans are put on hold until we can have this meeting to talk to you all, and so that we can hear what we have to say. This is meant to be an informal meeting. This is non-regulatory. It's not a hearing. We don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you all, although we do have a PowerPoint here if we need to consult any graphs or charts or anything that come out of either the plans, or if we have some other report that we want to try to reference. We do have that capacity here, but the intent is really to just talk. So what we'd really like to do is to really summarize first in a short, basically present to you very quickly a summary of what we'd heard from the previous comments and the previous meetings that we've had, to hear from what you had all said. And we'll summarize kind of the big points that we heard. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do we go about addressing those concerns as we move forward with the in-stream flow plan and the lake level investigation. And then we'll talk about how those documents were changed and how those concerns were ultimately addressed. I'm going to do the summary, and I'm going to kind of go through issues, and we'll kind of go through, and then we'll totally open it up and just have a conversation. To help me, I do have Kent Fenimore, who helped pull together the lake level investigation write-up, and Jim Gallagher, who's also our agency's chief engineer, and Wayne, who's a hydrogeologist, will talk and bring the details. I'll give the big picture, and then if questions come up that I can't answer, or details need to be explained, then these gentlemen will help to do that. Just a reminder, sort of just as an overall picture here, that the goal that we set out to do through the in-stream flow program was to maintain water quality, was to protect water quality, both the Lamprey River and also throughout the watershed, including Pawtuckaway Lake. And the way that we've approached this, in both the river and I think in the approach that we've taken to the lake as well, is to try to match natural conditions to the extent that we possibly can. So the way that we've approached this whole in-stream flow program is really to try to mimic the natural conditions. We can never recreate natural conditions. It's not 1602. But what we're trying to do is to mimic them and get as much of the function and value out of our waterways as we possibly can. The in-stream flow program, just as a very quick summary, was created by the legislature, and we have two pilots that we've been engaged in. One is in the Souhegan River and one is in the Lamprey River. The purpose of those programs is to set a protected in-stream flow. That is a flow at which point, if you go beyond, will be detrimental to the ecology of the river, as well as to the uses that humans have of those rivers. They're put together with three components. There's a water management plan that has three components. There's a conservation plans, there's water management plans, or water use plans, and then there's dam management plans. The conservation plans are what they sound like. It's to protect, it's to make sure that people don't use too much water at any time. The water use plans are really to help to curtail water uses as the flow gets lower and lower and lower in those rivers. And then the dam management plans are set up such that there would be a set of 2-day pulses of release of water to, again, bring the water up for the ecology, mimicking a natural rainstorm, and this would happen very infrequently after a certain duration and at a very low flow. So that's the basic elements of the water management plan. As we went through that process in the Lamprey, the way that it worked out was that there were 2 lakes in the Lamprey watershed that were basically could be utilized for dam management, for flow augmentation, again at very low flows, Mendham's Pond and Pawtuckaway Lake. So as we've gone through this, we've looked at how much water would it take to do these kinds of relief pulses. I think you all, most of you have heard that if you were at the previous presentations. In the summertime, it's small amounts. I've held up 2 fingers before. That's the kind of lake level impact that would happen as a result of one of these 2-day releases. There's also, I think that the reason why a lot of folks are probably here is that we also are worried about low flows during winter conditions. Because believe it or not, we can have problems with low flows during the winter. And so, one of the aspects of that was to try to, again, be able to augment flows using these 2-day releases. In order to do that, you had to have enough water left in the lake in order to be able to release a certain amount of water. In order to do that, the 7-foot drawdown would not have worked. So DES engaged in a lake level investigation, which would move to change the winter lake level from a drop of 7 feet, which has been the traditional lake level, although it's rarely gotten to 7 feet, it's more like 6.5 on average, and change that to dropping it to 4.8 feet. And so that's what's the basic fundamentals of what we've been talking about. The lake level investigation has been completed. It's on our website. I believe it's on your website. And the water management plan is also being completed. That is on our website. I believe there's bits and pieces that may be on your website as well. So what I'd like to do is to go through, and I'm going to start with the winter time, because I think that has been the concern that we heard. Most people had more concerns about the winter time, and it also brings in the lake level investigation that DES has recently completed. What I'm going to do is to really talk about just a couple of different aspects, and these are the ones, again, that I think were the ones that came out most loudly and clearly to us as the concerns that we had heard from you all and from your neighbors. I will then turn to the summer management after that, because clearly there's also concerns about that, and I can tell you how we address them. So, just to remind you, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to sort of talk about the issue a little bit as we understand it, what we heard, and then move to, okay, well, what did we look at? How did we examine this issue? And then talk about, well, what did we do in the plan to either address that issue, or to make it better, or to somehow address it in a way that we hope that will be satisfying. And I'll probably let Kent talk a little bit more about the history, but just to remind you that the 7-foot drawdown really comes out of the way that the lake had been managed previously for hydropower, that was a decision that was made not based on really an assessment of either the ecology or human uses around it, but it was one of those decisions that was made because that's how things had been done. One of the changes that this lake level investigation does is it does look at a much broader range of concerns relative to that winter drawdown. And I think that frames up some of what you'll see in the decision, and that the way that DES came around on this is that we feel that the lake itself is, the health of the lake itself can be improved by changing that winter drawdown. So I'm going to talk first really about 4 issues that I think were the primary ones that came out relative to the winter drawdown and the lake level investigation. Excuse me for 1 second.
He says it's.
first issue that I think is probably front and center to a lot of people's concerns was the issue of docks. There are a lot of docks around Pawtuckaway Lake. And as you may recall, well, what we heard is that people were very concerned about having more ice at a higher level could have a detrimental impact on those docks. So what we did was last year, about November, as we were doing the winter drawdown, we stopped the winter drawdown for a 2-week period at that 4.8 level. And what we asked, and many of you did, was to take some photos. Take some photos of your docks, take some photos of your property, go out and see if this actually impacts you. There had been a previous study done by UNH which looked at this issue, and they concluded that something close to 25% of the docks might actually have some impact. So during the middle of that drawdown, we had that pause, and people were good enough to send us a lot of photos. And we also had our staff go out and take a look and do a bunch of photos themselves. And what we found is that indeed there are a number of docks that would have 1 or sometimes 2 feet wet at that 4.8 level. A good many of them, some significant proportion of those docks would have their feet wet a few inches. So there is definitely some impact. Potential impact that could happen. 2 mitigating factors. One is that if you look back in history as to the way that the lake has actually been managed, is that the time of ice out, which is sometime in March-ish, depending on the year, by that point, or by the beginning of February, or by the beginning of March, the water level in the lake is already headed back up. So there's already ice that is moving around the lake at that time. And in fact, by the time the water level is back up to 4.8 feet, in history, at least historically, that you still had ice conditions on the lake. So that certainly is one factor that we looked at, in that you already were dealing with ice at that level in the past. Another way in which we've chosen to be able to help you to mitigate for this is that this lake level change will occur over a 4-year period of time. And during that period of time, each year we'll stop that drawdown at about 4.8 feet, let people know that we're at that level so that you can get out and assess whether or not any changes would need to be made to your structures, such that if you're concerned about them getting impacted. That would give a 4-year period of time for those of you with seasonal docks to be able to address any concerns that you might have. And whether or not this is a couple of inches that you're worried about, or if this is something greater than that. So that's how essentially the dock issue is laid out in the lake level investigation, and that's the way that we've worked on it from a mitigation perspective. The second major issue that we heard about was ice safety. The people were concerned that if you had the lake at 4.8 feet, and on the rare occasion that a lake level reduction occurs, a relief pulse occurs, which is to drop the lake by something on the order of 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches, that would cause ice safety concerns. So what we basically have done over the last, again, year and a half or so, is to try to contact as many people as we can around the country, experts on ice, experts on cold winter situations, people really all over the country, and also local experts here in New Hampshire, people who manage water bodies, to understand a little bit more about that issue. And we certainly did find water bodies in which they have been very concerned about the impacts of a potential drop of lake level. And we found some of those in the Midwest. However, they were dropping the lake levels by something like 30 feet, whereas we're talking about a few inches. We do have other lakes in the state that have drawdowns that occur during the winter, and none of them are managed any differently for ice than otherwise. And we talked with the snowmobile experts at our Department of Resources and Economic Development, as well as at Fish and Game. And again, this was not an issue that any of them thought was really relevant to the recreational snowmobiling. And again, the reason for that is that this is a small amount over a very, very large lake, and that their concern was certainly that ice is always dangerous, being out on the ice is always dangerous, and that this did not make it any more so, in their opinion. One of the places we did call was the Cold Region Laboratory of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is up in Hanover, and they've done most of the ice research around the country. The next big category, which is where I think we probably spent a huge amount of time and energy, because it's the one that we're most concerned about as DES as well, is about phosphorus and water quality. I think that the biggest fear that people had that was expressed to us was relative to their property values, if that lake turns green. Because that's what would drop property values, that's what would really make people not be able to enjoy the resource that you all love. By the way, we love it too. And so that is a very, very serious issue, one which I took very, very seriously. So we have been doing water quality monitoring out there, in addition to the work that is already done by your volunteer lake assessment program, your VLAP program, who've been out there for 20 years? 20? More than that. 22, 25? I think you're one of the oldest programs. We have great data. And so what we did was we continued to build on the data that's already been collected by the volunteers with our professional staff that went out all winter long, drilled through the ice, took water quality samples, took samples at the outlets of the dams, also took samples at some of the tributaries which flow into Pawtuckaway. And we looked at this issue very, very closely over the past year. We've learned some interesting things. One of the things that we've learned, and this I think is really part of the crux of the issue and explain this, it's a little bit complex, but I'll try to lay this out, I think, in a way that is that you can follow, that everyone can follow, and we'll have an opportunity for lots of discussion about this. As the lake level goes down, once you get below about 5.5 feet in elevation, as you're dropping the lake in October, once you get below about 5.5 feet below the spillway, water stops flowing over Drowns Dam. That's the northern part of the lake. It's also the larger part of the lake in terms of the watershed area which drains into it. And it also happens to be the part of the lake where the tributary rivers that have most of the phosphorus loading also come in. So what happens, as I think we've come to learn, and I think is proved out through the data that we've been able to collect, or at least we can't prove it, but it's highly, it really shows that this is probably happening, is that when you get below 5.5 feet, water stops flowing out of Drowns Dam. That's the water that tends to have more phosphorus in it. So what we see is that when that change happens, you see much lower concentration of phosphorus in the water that comes out over Dolphin Dam. So you go from having fairly high concentration coming out of the north end to then low concentration coming out in the south end. And what's happening is that phosphorus load that's coming in the north end is dissipating throughout the lake. So one of the benefits of doing the drawdown, of the winter drawdown, is that you flush out a lot of phosphorus. So what's the impact of doing less? Well, one of the things that we have learned is that by leaving the water level so that it can flow over at a height high enough to keep water flowing throughout the winter over Drowns Dam, you flush a lot more phosphorus, more than double the amount of phosphorus that you would be able to flush by doing the 7-foot drawdown. So let me go through that just a little bit again, because this is kind of a complex thing, and I think that none of us really expected this either. But this is what we've been able to sort of piece together, is that the water level that we're talking about leaving the lake at we've talked, right now it's drawn down about 7 feet during the winter. We're talking about it being drawn down 4.8 feet. So instead of being down here, it's going to be up here. At about right here, so in that range, you have, when you get down below this point, then water stops flowing over Drown's Dam. So essentially no water that flows over except what leaks, or what happens maybe during a very large storm event during the winter. That water tends to have higher concentrations of phosphorus in the north end. Anybody who's familiar with the water quality sampling that VLAP program has done knows that Furls Brook is sort of phosphorus central. That's where the big phosphorus is coming. And that's what's dumping into the northern end of the lake. So what we've looked at is we looked at the relative concentrations of water leaving, before it gets below 5.5 feet and then after, and looked at where that phosphorus ends up. And we can't be out there, nobody can be out there monitoring this all the time. So we just know that from going out at the periodicity that we're able to go out. We don't see the storm events. Most of the phosphorus that comes in is usually happening through storm events. So we're kind of seeing something in between. But at least the calculations that we've been able to do based on the concentrations that we've been able to monitor, and again, looking back at the science that's been done previously, we're very confident that one of the reasons why the VLAP program has been tracking an increasing trend of phosphorus in the deep part of the north end is because of some of this flushing. This is also proves out to some extent what Jim Haney from the University of New Hampshire has been saying, that he felt that the deep drawdown of Pawtuckaway Lake during the winter has the potential to increase mobilization of phosphorus into that part of the lake. I think that the data we're finding does say that. So what do we plan to do about this? One thing is that we think it's very important for water to be flowing over Drown's Dam during the winter. And that's one of the reasons why the lake level investigation came out the way it did. We thought we went into this to talk about in-stream flow. At the end of this, we came out of this talking about the lake quality of Pawtuckaway Lake, the water quality of Pawtuckaway Lake. One of the things we are going to do is we're going to monitor this thing. In 2 years, we owe a report to the New Hampshire legislature about what did we do here? How did it go? What did we learn? What should we be looking at if this is ever going to happen again anywhere else in the state? One of the things that we're going to be doing with that, and you'll hear it again in a moment, is that we're going to be doing some monitoring of this site. We're committed, I'm committed, and I'm committed to you all, that we're going to keep doing this year-round monitoring. We don't have another lake in the state in which we're doing year-round monitoring. We gave that up about a decade ago, just because of staff cutbacks. But we're hopefully continuing to rely on the VLAP program in the summer and continuing to help that group to do their good work. And then we'll use staff to go out and monitor through the winter, cutting holes in the ice, getting out there and doing that sampling for the next few years to make sure that what we think is happening really is happening. And we'll continue to analyze this and continue to be able to have reports. And one of the other things that we will be doing is we'll have a committee set up. There is already a committee set up in the legislation, which will hopefully help to advise us on how to do that evaluation. And we'll have public meetings of that, and we will be inviting anybody who wants to participate. Please come help us understand what are the issues we should really be looking at in that evaluation process. So the final thing that we really looked at and we heard about from you all, and again is another issue that's near and dear to my heart, is aquatic plants. So one of the things that has come out, certainly in some places, and even on some of our very own fact sheets within DES, was that there, in some cases, is a benefit to doing some sort of a winter drawdown for aquatic plant control. I think that the jury is still out in the scientific community about how that really plays out. We did have a study that was done on the Ashwaylet Pond, Ashwaylet Lake, Ashwaylet Pond, which looked pretty closely at that. And obviously the issue, rightly so, is that we don't want to do some change in management which stimulate the growth of plants, especially the kind we don't want. And so what we looked at was, what does really the science tell us about that? And it's interesting in that certainly drawdowns have the impact of changing the plant composition within a lake. Unfortunately, sometimes that change in composition is actually not so good for the lake. It can actually benefit plants that are well adapted to that sort of disturbance, which tend to be some of those invasive plants. This was something that Therese Thompson, I don't know, is Therese out there? Therese Thompson sent us a bunch of literature from Massachusetts that talked about a lot of that, as well as our own research that's been done here. So we are certain that there's likely to be some sort of change. We're less worried that that change would be detrimental, but we're going to look at it. And so that's one of the other places that we're actually, and if you've been out on the lake in the past week, you will have seen DES boats out going probably pretty slowly in really straight lines back and forth across the lake. They're not trolling for fish, although they were using something that looks like a glorified fish finder. They're actually doing sonar of the bottom of the lake. So this is doing bathymetry with a sonar that's hooked up to a pretty fancy computer. I think the computer program is like $15,000, and the fish finder is about $100. It's a really complicated piece of software that allows us to do mapping of underwater vegetation. And then we also will have people going out either diving or snorkeling or with underwater scope things, we call those aquascopes, that allow you to look down at the bottom of the lake, and they're going to be doing basically a baseline survey. So as of right now, before anything changes, we'll have a very good understanding of what the baseline is for aquatic vegetation. And the focus of that study is on that narrow band of the lake, which would change between a 4.8-foot drawdown and a 7-foot drawdown. So that will be the focus of looking at that, and we'll be monitoring that. And again, my commitment is that we're going to try to get out there every year for at least the next few years to make sure that we don't have something changing that we don't understand. Those were the major concerns that we had heard about the winter. Lots of comments, and I appreciate all of your comments. But if you boil them down, those were the things that were the primary issues that were raised. There were two in the summertime, moving to the summertime drawdown, which again would be a small amount of water that would be released to augment flow for aquatic life. And after certain low flows and after certain durations of those low flows. We did look at what would be the maximum theoretically possible. We also looked at what would be the maximum that's ever happened in terms of, if you look across the flow history, and I believe we have some of that on our website, the period of the 1960s, about 1962 through sort of 1966, 65, are the lowest flows ever on record. They were very, very, very deep drought. I don't know how many of you were around this area at that time, but it was certainly the deepest drought that New Hampshire has ever had for that extended period of time. So we looked at what would be the worst case scenario under that situation, and I believe that we would, over those years, have released something on the order of 6 or 7 inches.
Or 4.
4 inches, sorry.
Less than 4.
That would have been the maximum extent. But even so, we heard from you that you're releasing 4 inches of water when the lake is already lower because it's dry. So we heard that, we understand that. So what we have put into this plan is that there is a maximum total drawdown that can occur between of both natural and us doing management of 18 inches. Now that sounds like a lot, but you all get something like a foot of change that happens annually anyway because of evaporation and other things that happen during the summer. What that means is that if you get too low flow, if you get below 18 inches, we won't do anything else. We're done. If that 18 inches below the spillway happens because of a dry spring, and it's in the middle of July, we're not going to release any more water. If it happens in August, happens in August. It happens in May, happens in May. That's the limitation. We're not going to go beyond that. The other piece that we heard about, and this is somewhat related to that, is the issue of loons. So obviously you have nesting pairs of loons. They're amazing. They're, I think both for residents and tourists in New Hampshire, it's one of the really truly remarkable things that we have here. And so that's clearly, we would never want to do something which would harm those critters. Loons don't really walk. Loons only swim. Loons are horrible at walking. So if the problem with the issue with loons is that if you draw the lake down beyond a few inches during loon season, that they won't be able to get back to their nests. So this is something recognized. So what we've done in the plan is that, and this is based on the recommendations of the Loon Preservation Committee, which is a statewide committee, as well as our New Hampshire Fish and Game, is that we would never, during nesting season, drop the lake more than 6 inches, or be party to that. So if it naturally goes down 6 inches again, we're not going to release any more water. The other thing that will happen is that, again, this is not just a number, is that anytime we have any kind of management event that would be coming up during a time period in which loons are nesting, is that before anything would happen for management, that we would consult with both New Hampshire Fish and Game and with the Loon Preservation Committee. So we have a safety valve on this as well, that if those experts in loons believe that doing anything at that particular time of year would be detrimental to the birds, obviously we would not do that. And that's what's written into the plan. So those were the primary issues that I think that we ended up looking at, and the ones that I think we heard most vociferously from you all. That's how we've dealt with them in the plans. And what I would like to do now is just to see if you gentlemen have anything that I've missed to add to this conversation before we open it up. And I think what I'm hoping that we'll do is have an open discourse here. And if it gets unruly, maybe Mary will step in as moderator. Unless she's the unruly one, then I don't know what we'll do.
Exactly.
Got that right.
So,
I don't have anything to add. I don't.
Just to clarify the winter drawdown, that the 4-year implementation period means that there'd be a 6-inch change each year, so incrementally increasing the 7-foot drawdown up 6 inches, and then the next year 6 inches, next year 6 inches. So it's not delaying it for 4 years; it's delaying it incrementally for 4 years.
thank you. So, what I'd like to do is just go ahead and let's talk. Yeah.
Great. First question is, you're trying to make it so it's a natural flow of the rivers. You're trying to keep a natural flow to a minimum amount, what I understand. In nature, where we've had dry times, whether there's a lake or not, if there were no lakes back in 1602, which you said,
Right.
you'd still have no flow.
Right.
That's natural.
Right.
So if we got a time that's a dry spell, that's natural. Why are we trying to change what is natural?
Great. That's a great question, and I think it's the one that comes up the most often when we're talking about this in-stream flow program. The way that we looked at this is that the flows that we have today are managed. Pawtuckaway Lake is 15%. Is that correct? 15% of the watershed.
Pawtuckaway and Mendham's together. Yeah.
Pawtuckaway and Mendham's, the watersheds which drain into Pawtuckaway and Mendham's are 15% of the watershed. That means that 15% of the water that would normally be going down the river during a low flow period, like you're talking about, a natural low flow period, would normally be going down the river. 15% of the water, because it's right now locked up behind the dams. And in the dry periods, you know that there's no water flowing over the spillways. So the only water which is leaving those lakes is happening through leakage and through groundwater around. So that's one impact. And that's only one. And that's only 2 dams. There's 8 other dams in the watershed. There's lots of other things that are happening. There's people who are using water. There's pavement, which has changed the natural hydrology. There's all kinds of things which have altered our natural hydrology. The way that the protected in-stream flow is created is that it sort of subtracts all of that out. And we get back to what is the natural flow condition. So we understand that there's other things going on, and that has affected where we are today. So what it's done is it's essentially said, okay, during these 6 different periods during the year, because again, there's a lot more flow in January than there is in July. That's natural, right? And it's natural in July that you would sometimes have very, very low flows, and sometimes you got more water than you want. That's natural also. So what this program has done is looked at, okay, what are the normally low flow periods versus what would be those abnormally low periods, the ones that are being affected by humans, the ones that are being affected by management, or one way or another, that we're affecting those. So what we've chosen are flows which are very low. And also, again, another safety check on that is that sometimes low flows happen even lower than those, and it's perfectly natural. But sometimes they don't. But they shouldn't be happening as long. And that's one of the other things that all of the impacts of humans on the landscape have done, is to sometimes make those very, very low flows happen for longer periods of time. So what the plan has done, what this study has done, what it's looked at is, at what point do you have impacts on aquatic life? At what very, very low flows do you have? Are you very likely to have impacts on aquatic life? How is that? What does that look like naturally? What does that look like in a managed condition? And then establish how low is abnormally low and how long is abnormally long. And it's only then, after you've gone through all of that, is there an attempt to manage using flow augmentation. And that flow augmentation, because it's coming from 2 fairly large lakes, in July, for example, the flow augmentation is 0.05 feet. 0.05 feet is an inch, 0.6 of an inch. So you're talking about dropping Lake Pawtuckaway Lake by that. You know, I mean, I'm going to drink that by scotch. We're talking about this. So, Tom, I know Tom's. So, you know, so is there a cost? Is there a cost? Yes, you are dropping some of the lake level in the lake. But is there a benefit during these abnormally low flows, during abnormally long periods of time? Absolutely. And that's what that's the entire paradigm that we're talking about. It's called natural flow paradigm. Is really looking at mimicking nature in that way. Not trying to get back to 1602. We understand very clearly that we can't do that. I used to restore wetlands for a living. Restore salt marshes. And there's no way I can restore a salt marsh to what it looked like before people landed here and started, using the salt marshes for salt marsh hay and everything else that we've used them for. You can't, because the whole environment has changed. The atmosphere has changed. The plants that are there are no longer the same composition. But what you can do is you can restore the natural function. And that's what this program is geared towards. And what we don't want to do is, again, have a cost that at the expense of the water quality in Pawtuckaway Lake. We don't want to solve one problem and create another. And that's what this plan has tried very, very, very hard to do, is to balance those so that we're not impairing the lake. All the changes we're talking about in Pawtuckaway Lake are within the natural range of variability for the lake. Again, attempting to mimic that nature.
Ted, I'm trying to put this in kind of watershed terms for myself. So during drought conditions, will the Pawtuckaway dams functions so as to release water faster than it's being gained within the lake, or slower than, or do those dams become kind of run of river, as it were, a run of watershed? You follow?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking. You're asking is, and the answer I studied economics, so in true economist form, I'm going to say it depends. What it depends on is the input of rainfall.
Sure.
Last summer, just as an example, last summer we did a test pulse. We did a test release about a year ago. Water levels were at a very low level. We did the pulse release. We saw the result coming downstream, and the lake level never went down. The lake level went up. So how is it possible that we could possibly release water from the lake and watch the lake level actually go up? That seems to be counterintuitive. But what was happening is that we had a lot of input. We had some precipitation. We had some other things going on, and so the lake was actually filling at the same time that we were releasing.
So, I mean, arguably, you wouldn't be releasing water under those conditions because you'd have enough rainfall throughout the watershed. You know, so you were trying to do a pulse for test purposes, and you happen to get that precipitation. In drought conditions,
Right.
we have got less than normal watershed contributions. There's 15% watershed going to Pawtuckaway Lake.
Right.
Would you be drawing water out, releasing water out of the lake faster than it's being gained?
We don't know, because it would depend on the time of year. So in the middle of August, when groundwater inflow is at its least, and you have lots of evaporation, then in fact the lake could continue to go down until you have the big precipitation event. In fact, it doesn't take much of a precipitation event, as you well know, to fill up this lake. You know that it doesn't take too much when you're below the spillway, a quarter of an inch, maybe a half an inch of rain, and you're back over the spillway. For those of you who watch the spillway, and I know there are some of you who do that, but you can tell that's what happens. But yes, that's one of the reasons why we put that 18-inch limitation on management, because yes, there's management, but there's also the natural conditions I think that you're describing. Most of the time, if you look back at history, most of the time, most years, we will have a precipitation event at some point in that bio period which follows some sort of a management event. So usually, most years, there's one or two management events a year. So that means that most years there was some other rain event that happened which would have brought the elevation back up. It's only in really a couple of those years, the 60s years, and maybe one of those early 2000 years, in which we saw water levels would continue to sort of keep declining all the way through.
The values that we put in the water management plan describe an absolute value as if it was a bathtub. And it says if you were to release this volume from this lake, then in a bathtub, it would drop by a certain number of feet. But it didn't calculate how much inflow is happening during that time period from the streams, which rarely ever go dry, and the groundwater continues to flow as well. So not having any information about what might be the conditions of the streams and the groundwater at any one time, we only gave the number of the drawdown based on this bathtub scenario. So that's essentially the worst case scenario, also not counting evaporative losses from the lake that naturally happen. So you have a number of different things that are adding and subtracting at about the same time, so that you have we've only given you the data for this bathtub value because we can't calculate an evaporative loss over 2 days, and we can't determine ahead of time all the different conditions of groundwater or of the tributary inflow for all the different permutations of events that might happen. So rather than try to present information that we don't have, it's just that very simplistic model of the maximum drawdown that would happen as a result of releasing that amount of water.
I have a trick question.
Oh, good.
Tell us the trick first.
Who would be responsible for making the decision in the summer for drawdown?
So the way that this will work, just to set up the process of how this would work. Many of you have been on our website. I know the Katowskis are. Because they tell us when it's not working. We have a spreadsheet that sits on our website which tracks the Lamprey River and the Souhegan River if you're ever interested. And it is there are interesting differences between the two, and I'd love to if anybody wants to hear about them, we can talk about that later. But what happens is you can track, and let's say we get into say a July time period. And we see that the water level, and the gauge that we use to track this is the gauge at the Newmarket Durham town line. And we can watch what's going on there, because these are real-time gauge data from the USGS. So you can actually watch it sort of as it happens. And you can watch that this, you can see when we get below this protected in-stream flow. The protected in-stream flow at that time period is 16 CFS. Make it simple. And then you can watch the number of days that we're at that. At that time period, the number of days you would have to be at 16 CFS is 10 days. Look at the plan.
I asked who?
Okay, so I'll get to that. So at that point, we will have the numbers in front of us that say, okay, we're at 16 CFS. We've now been there for 10 days. And we have to make a decision, are we going to do a release? How do we then base that decision? That decision happens by me. I'm responsible for that decision, although I have to work with the Dam Bureau, because they're the ones who actually have to operate it. They wouldn't let me touch their dams.
So here's the trick question.
Right.
Can you tell me the dates of the new loon nesting season?
I will tell you they're in our plan as to what the loon nesting season normally is. But the loon nesting season will be based on when there's loons nesting. That's the smart aleck answer to your trick question.
Good job.
Is that we don't know when loons will nest, because sometimes they fail a nest and then they got to start over.
Fair enough.
And the same thing, again, I studied salt marshes. Same things happen with salt marsh sparrows. So they can end up nesting, 4 or 5 times. So that nesting, that's the nesting period is when they're nesting. And if they have a failed nest, that's when we need to really talk to Fish and Game and the Loon Preservation Committee to understand. Look, are these birds going to get off another? Are they going to get off another nest here or not? And that's a consultation. So that is something that we would be looking for. That's a trigger point. If we're beyond kind of loon nesting season, we know that there are some dates at which part you're on, and we still will be looking at whether or not there's actually loons nesting. You don't have to worry about that as much.
The primary season was May 15th to July 15th, and that's what the plan says, is recognizes from what Fish and Game told us, what the loon preservation people told us. They said, if the loons are in the primary nesting season, that's when they are, and that's where we've set aside that block of protection. And after that, I guess we'll be discussing what the condition is in the lake relative to that with the Fish and Game and with the Loon Preservation Commission. Something more to that, I want to say, I forgot.
That's okay, thank
We
you.
had a couple of questions. Tom, did that solve your?
It did, thank you.
Oh, it was also, it had to actually be viable loon nesting to happen. So in the period May 15th to July 15th, if there are no loons and there's no nesting successful, then that 6-inch criteria defaults back to the 18-inch criteria.
My purpose, of course, was to see if the dots are connected. And you certainly made the case that they are.
So I saw 3. I saw Liz, and then I saw a gentleman in the back, and then I saw you, and then I saw Mary. So why don't we just go this way? Is that okay? Okay, Liz?
Okay, on the loons, I'm glad you mentioned that. In the dam management program or plan, they actually did address in a way that the summer plan doesn't. They did address the fact that there's often a second nesting which would happen later. And so that it goes beyond the July 15th date.
Yes.
I'm happy to see that in there. I would also ask that in addition to contacting Fish and Game, or Fish and Wildlife and the LPC, who we partner with a lot, that you contact the PLIA.
Okay, so that's a good, I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that needs to happen here as we move forward with management events, is that we do need to make sure that people know about them, because they'll see water leaving the lake, and who are they going to call? They're going to call Tom. So Tom's phone lights up. He needs to know what's going on. So we're going to have some coordination, and that's one of the other things that I would like to work with you all on. Is what does that coordination look like?
I have a recommendation for that.
Do you want to say that now, or do we want to work on that later?
It's part of a bigger picture. I just sort of heard the other.
Okay, we'll come around that
issues
issue.
are in case I have to incorporate.
Okay.
But speaking of PLIA, it's not just let us know, it's so that we can let you know.
Sure.
Because we're much more the eyes and ears for the loons
I'm sure.
on the lake than either of the organizations.
Well, we're all the ears.
This is the eyes.
You're the eyes.
Well, your eyes, the ears, and the feet, and the hands. I mean, yeah, we recognize that you folks know the lake because you sit in it a lot, whether a boat's under you or not at the time. Sir.
Your plan is to try and maintain a minimum historic water flow in the river. How does the extraction of water along the river fit into that plan? In other words, if people drawing water out of the river in Raymond, Epping, you could drain the lake here and you couldn't keep the water flowing enough theoretically. How does that?
Thanks for asking that. I think that's one of the important. That's why the water management plan has 3 parts. The dam management plan is actually the last thing that happens. The first thing that happens is that we have conservation plans for everybody who's using water along the river, such that they have to be using water as wisely as possible at all times, especially during drought conditions. The second thing that happens is a water use plan. If you look at the report, there's a whole appendix of, I don't know how many water use plans there are for the Lamprey. It's a lot. And it's for any of the users that are currently registered in the state as a water user, which means that they're using more than 20,000 gallons per day, 600,000 gallons per month of water. They have to register. That's part of the statute that created the in-stream flow program. Those water use plans dictate what those water users have to do at those low flow periods that we talked about, that protected in-stream flow. So let's take an example of, say, how about Durham? Just for hypothetical. Because no one here, I'm sure, is interested in that one.
Keep talking. We're all ears.
So Durham has a water use plan, as well as a dam management plan, as well as a conservation plan, because they have Wiswall Dam, which is their reservoir for water. They also have a conservation plan, which is currently in its final stages of being approved by the state. And they also have a brand new conservation plan being approved by the state. And they also have a water use plan. That water use plan very clearly articulates what Durham is to do when the water level hits 16 CFS. And what they have to do is they got to stop using water flowing down the Lamprey. So that's the same plan, essentially, that the other water users have as well. Durham will have to go from using the Lamprey, which it does as its primary water source, to using other water sources. It has wells, it has an intake on the Oyster River. So it has to move off of the Lamprey when it gets to 16 CFS.
Well, that's on the reservoir.
And they have the reservoir, which is essentially the Wiswall Dam. But whatever water is coming in from up above has to pass out. That's passed down over the dam. That's part of both their dam management plan and their water use plan. So both of those are fundamentally part of this and are tied into the legal structure around the program. Yeah, go ahead.
Will there be additional water withdrawal permits issued in the future along the Lamprey River?
I'm sure of it.
It's simple sense that you can only draw so much water
Right.
out of the river. It's going to get low quicker.
That's one of the advantages, I think, of this program, is that anybody who wants to come in new, they will know that when that river level gets to a certain level, they got to be off the river. So if you are a tomato grower, for example, I don't know, let's just take an example. Maybe it should be a dehydrated water manufacturing company that takes dry water and adds wet water to make rehydrated water. Well, let's use tomatoes. So let's say we're a tomato company and we want to use a lot of water to grow our tomatoes. And water is necessary for our tomato plant. And we get to July or August and we're planning to build this new plant. And we know that, boy, if water levels get really low in July or August, I may not be able to use the water that's coming out of the river. If my business plan requires me to have that water in July and August, I might be in trouble, which means that I'm going to have to develop alternative water sources. I'm going to have either a pond that I can draw water from. I'm going to have a set of wells that are not attached to the river that I can be able to draw water from. So any new users coming in will already have that limitation placed upon them. So that's one of the advantages that's one of the reasons why this program was invented, was to deal with that very issue in a way that was rational, so that people could understand that there's only so much water. But we don't have a water permitting system the way they have out west, where you're allocated a certain amount of water. It's everyone's water, but you only get as much as as can be reasonably used by you and not impact someone else. So that's the way the program is set up.
There's 2 points about that particular thing in Durham. But one is, and this, when I first met Ted, we had a very clear discussion with each other about the fact that without any plan at all, anytime anybody wants to, they can pull water out of the Lamprey River. And for that matter, the DES can pull the plug up the top. If there is a plan in place, they have to adhere to the rules and the system that are within the plan. And it gives everyone at least more control, certainly on the expectation of things. Because prior to that, nobody has any control. I remember last summer, I guess it was 2012, I called Ted and I said, Ted, what happened to Bunker Dam in Epping? I thought we were trying to keep water in the river. And he said, Tom, there's no plan. There was a dam and now there isn't a dam. If we have a plan and we know what the capacities of each of these storage areas are, maybe we can better manage it. The introduction of this plan, the only question that I had about it when I read everything about it was, how do you actually manage specifically when are there flow gauges that you also have online for the withdrawals from Wiswall Dam? That was because you're saying, yes, if they take 3 inches out of Pawtuckaway, we're going to make sure that 3 inches goes over on the other side of the spillway of Wiswall Dam during this period of drought. And my question is, how, as a good intention, we all have good intentions, how are you going to monitor that? How do you test it? How do you check it? How do you police it?
It's a great question, and what we're doing right now with Durham is developing a set of standard operating procedures, whereby they will do that, whereby they're going to measure it, they're going to post it. How do we know that they did that? That's what we're working through with them right now. They're now much better able to do this than they ever have been because of the way the new dam is the new dam configuration that they have as a result of the work that they just did. So they do have gauges. And we have also, I think the safety valve we have on this is that we can also compare between what we know is being released, because we have some volumes that are being released, and what is showing up downstream. So we can be pretty clear about what's going on. And I will tell you, Wayne is a hydrograph junkie. And he watches these. What the hydrograph is the chart that shows how water is flowing at a particular gauge. So you'll see it goes day by day, and it goes up and down and up and down. He has no social life, and he just watches them. But he brings them to me, and I know he does, because he brings them to me the next morning and says, look what's going on the river. And we can tell when people are monkeying around with the river. We see it in the hydrograph. We can tell when a dam is doing something or another. We can tell when big water users are withdrawing. We can tell when UNH switches its water use to another source. You can tell that by looking at the hydrograph. So we do have a fail-safe. So we're gonna have a set of SOPs. They're gonna standard operating procedures that will inform them as to what they're supposed to do at every point. And then we also have, and how that's gonna get, how that information is gonna get transmitted. And then there's going to be also, I think, a fail-safe in that we can see what's being released and we can see what's actually showing up. And having done a test pulse release, we understand what that looks like.
I'm working with Jim Dumbrust over at the university too to try to get that information so that it's automatically online, so that the Wiswall actual water level values would be posted. They collect that data now with their gauge, and they're trying to figure out a way to make it like USGS does, available to the public online, but they're working with trying to protect their system integrity, because you can't just open it up to the public without also opening up to hackers and people that might do stuff to you.
Well, one of the things that we noticed, Ed Kukowski, your watchdog, pointed this out, was that even though the minute-to-minute information is available on the satellite, and if you're looking at the actual graphic, everybody's got the link to it and they can go see it. Sometimes entering the data on the DES site, it's not an automatic transfer, it requires humans, and sometimes you're a little bit behind.
Let me tell you, you can do it yourself. So on that spreadsheet, you can't save it, but you can go in there and copy the data down. There's just a formula, and if you just copy the one before it down for the next few days, you can update that all by yourself. I'll show you how to do
You
it.
pay us to do that?
Well, if you're that interested in knowing what's happening over the weekend while I'm gone or while I'm on vacation, then yeah, that's one way to do it.
I mean, that is something that.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you.
That link, automate that link to get it on the DES webpage. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's UNH is planning on putting their gauge level, their gauge of the Wiswall levels on their own website, someplace in the public arena.
There's a human factor, Jim, between the data showing up on the gauge and it's getting transferred actually onto the website. It sounds like waste.
Let me go to the next stratosphere, which is when I get some funding, we're also planning, I've got a scope of work developed or being developed that says we want to get a model or a program written so that someone doesn't have to do that. So it's all automated. But we did hear also people saying, well, we're glad somebody's looking at it on a daily basis because we don't want this to happen without any human interaction.
Well, we have Ed.
Yeah.
So we were sort of working our way around the room and we got to here.
No, I haven't asked my question yet.
I know.
Oh,
That's what I
okay.
mean. Yes.
Okay, so if we get to one of these events and we're 10 days into it and you need to start making a decision and you're going through and calling Fish and Game and the Loon Preservation Committee and whoever else you're going to call, are you talking to anybody about what weather events are coming and is this really necessary?
Yes.
So that's in the plan that...
Right, because let's say that, I mean, obviously weather forecasting is,
50%.
And it's getting better and better all the time. So indeed, if we're 9 days into a 10-day cycle, and it's pretty clear that there's a nor'easter coming upon us, and it's going to hit in 3 days. Okay, so we went 13 days instead of 10 days. So what? At that point, at that level, we're not going to worry about that. But if it's clear, if you're looking at the weather system and it's pretty clear as far as the eye can see, we can look out weather system. Weather data is good about maybe 7 days for to see if a system is coming. Regardless, I mean, maybe it'll hit you, maybe it won't. But 7 or 8 days out, you can tell that there's a system maybe coming this way. If there's nothing on the horizon, then I think that we're full speed ahead. But this is something that we would talk about if there's. This is why there isn't a computer program that automatically does this. We have to look at this and make sure that at that point, yes, it's go time.
This is largely in the adaptive management part of the arena because one of the things that we looked at is how to predict ahead of time what conditions might be, and it was uncommonly scary when I was watching the hydrograph and the protected stream flows that we would get to the end of the duration and have a rainfall event almost on a predictable basis, that it was very, very common for me to see the pattern that we've got described in the protected in-stream flows for durations and magnitudes. You get down to below that level, it would last for that number of days, and then we'd have a rainstorm event either within a day. And that is because it's all generated based on that pattern of what has happened in the past. And that pattern is commonly what we see happening all the time anyway. So it didn't astound me as much as it should have, but if you were looking at this, you'd see these events, and then on the day that we were supposed to start a management event, you'd have a rainfall event, and it would just reset the clock. So this was something that you will expect to see because it is how we generated the volumes and the rates that we were looking for anyway.
So what you're saying is that if we do get past that and we see nothing, then we're pretty sure, we're taking a conservative approach, we're pretty sure that this is bad.
But determining the forecasting, 30% probably isn't good enough. You need to have a fairly certain event, and it needs to be of a certain volume and we haven't really figured all that nuance out of how much is enough to change your mind if you're in that wiggle room in between. If it's real clear that you're going to have a storm, okay, then you can make a good decision. If it's clear that you're going to have a little bit of rain, maybe, then you can't necessarily make that decision based on what we have for forecasting now. So we're going to have to work out more of the kinks, but that has been part of the process of evaluating whether an event happens or not for a number of years.
So we're moving our way around. We got to Mary.
That's the limits. We've established pretty succinctly that there'll be someone contacting the itself to make sure that the rules are continued. Because there are,
That'll be part of the decision.
our nesting rules that had stressed with some.
Yes.
So I think it's very important that that is taken into
Because
consideration.
of too much rain.
Yeah, interesting.
So why don't we circle back around? Although the gentleman in the back over in the corner has had his hand up for a while. Why don't we go back there and then we'll go to over here. So
The town presently has a problem with a water spring company that's going to drain the town's water, and that would affect the watershed. If they were to win that case, what would you do to help us to mitigate that water drainage from that?
I would say Springs, I think, is your reference.
Right.
Yeah. Well, whoever they call themselves now.
Right.
this plan, right? So
It
this
directly
plan,
affects, we have two competing sources for the water, is what I'm saying.
I understand. This plan only incorporates those particular water users which are directly connected into the Lamprey River. So it's mostly those water sources which are in.
This is a well, I think, that's within the range of the protected.
It's in the same
It
water.
is.
Okay.
Right. So in that case, it has a groundwater permit that's required, so they'll still have to go through the permitting process. And they'll have to show that they're meeting the water management plan criteria for how much they affect stream flow. So that is part of the groundwater permitting group's requirements. And they'll have to get a water management plan through us before that shows that they're not having a negative impact on the stream flow conditions during the times when we're concerned. So
Even if they have a permit in place now, but they haven't started extracting water yet.
I don't know what the legal parts of this, as far as going back in time and saying this doesn't count because we're predated. I can't even
Do you guys talk to Brandon?
answer. Yes.
So if this ever came in for a permit in the future, or to renew, or to use the ones they have right now, there would be communication between.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, just a
Okay.
concern, and like I say, I didn't hear it factored in anywhere on your plan.
Well, it's because they're not a current water user.
Yeah, but they could be a very big current water user if they were to win their claim.
This would be a new wrinkle for them because the in-stream flow, there was no protected in-stream flow until August 30th of this year.
So, let's move forward.
Move forward.
Okay. I want to put a well out here,
Okay.
all right? 350,000 gallons a day.
Okay.
So I have to go through a process,
Yes.
additional process now, that you said is now in effect.
The groundwater permitting rules are already in effect.
That would address the issue of excessive water being taken out
Yes.
of the ground. It may affect some.
It looks at how does it affect other water users in the area? Does your well change how their water works? And it looks at how does your well affect surface water? So
And did you know when that was, that's just recent,
August,
5 years or something like that.
5 years?
August.
The groundwater permitting
Well,
rules
no,
have been in
I'm
place.
just talking, to-
But he's talking about the new rules for water usage just went into effect August 30th, right?
This is, oh, you're talking about the water management plan?
yes,
The water management plan, yes, before you put a well in the ground, you need to get a water management permit from us, but you also need to get, well, not before you get a well in the ground, but during that permitting process. It goes through the hoops of the groundwater permitting people.
Right.
And part of that hoop is to show what is the impact on other water users and what is the impact
but
on surface
that piece
water.
right there is new.
No, that's been part of it. They had to show before that what impact that they were having on the surface water
That's right.
and groundwater.
But not the impact that they would have on me as a resident. That may be effective.
I don't know, that's not our
A
program.
water user, a water user.
But it's important, it's tied in, because the amount of water that they seek to draw out of USA Springs is the exact, I wouldn't say exact, but it's roughly the same amount of water that is used by this town on a daily basis now, by the entire town.
So anything that falls under the jurisdiction of the in-stream flow program, which would be those water uses which directly affect the Lamprey River, which fall into that there's a whole set of definitions and rules about how that happens. Anything from here on out has to fall under, would be looked at. Now, the only piece that we're looking at is the in-stream flow piece. We do not look at the actual groundwater. We don't look at the groundwater well information. That happens under the groundwater, the drinking water program.
I understand, but there's gotta be a link here in this whole process.
There is a very clear link in statute.
And since the organization that was referenced has been at this for over 10 years, whatever you folks have come into, whatever's happened with what you have done and created, any type of legislation, I would envision that they, 10 years old now, are grandfathered in some form or fashion. To grandfather in respect of what the amount of water they're taking out is gonna have an effect on every individual in the community, which they haven't had up to.
We'll get
I spoke to Brandon recently, and in the in-stream flow rules, it does say that anyone who comes in and needs to make sure that they have shown that they meet the existing they're still meeting the protected in-stream flows, the ones established for the river. So that he said that is what he was telling me. He said that seemed like that would apply to them under the current go-round of them coming back into play. So that they don't. I don't believe from what. I'm not really a lawyer, so I'm not sure if I should say anything here, but
no, you should.
No, but if you have the rule in place now, hopefully there's no grandfathering clauses in it. Otherwise, these people are going to obviously agree.
This is a tricky question that I would really like to bring back to you, because I think that we would actually like to have real attorneys look at that question and make sure that we give you a satisfactory
Well, because
response.
it is significant. It's a significant sum of water that they wish to withdraw.
And it is a new wrinkle in this whole
Yes, it
issue that I think that we would need to. I don't want to poorly serve you by telling you something that is not true. And so I think that we would be better off finding the right answer to that, and we'll get that back to you, because I know that this is of particular interest, especially, I'm just looking at your new newsletter. It's right there on the front page.
Sure.
Although I will notice it's actually on the front page below the Lamprey River Management Plan. So.
By the way, that's a very large extraction. And when we were reviewing this even last year, I looked at how many towns it's not just Durham, it's not just Reagan. And, the future, they're looking for the inexpensive way to where they're going to get their water 20 or 30 years from now.
Sure.
It's only now that in some ways, they're starting to plan for the possibility of actually having to drill more wells, so they're not just sticking a straw in the river, to take it out. Durham being one of them that just recently got applied for a permit. I'm sure they haven't.
They got their permit.
They got their permit for a new well, and it's the first new well that Durham's had in some time. So, the whole effort here does seem to be causing people to have to, they're being forced to rethink the easy way out.
That's the benefit I see to the whole program, is it does make people think about what they're doing rather than just say, "Is a river? Take it."
So we'll cruise back around. Pam?
I have two questions. One has to do with my perhaps erroneous assumption that the in-stream management plan is going to be a 2-year pilot.
The way that this works, so the process moving forward, maybe this is a good time to sort of outline what the process moving forward is.
Well, I don't want to get a real long answer.
How about the 2-year process? So the 2-year process is that.
Not a real long answer.
Right. We have the legislature in the last session. They extended the program, and they said you need to have your in-stream flow done in September of 2013, and you need to report back to the legislature in, I think it's November?
The report is September, there's a public hearing.
Right, in September of 2015. So over the next 2 years, our job is to evaluate the program and to report back to the legislature in 2 years as to how did it go, what did you do, did it work, did it not work, what did you learn, what should the legislature do next?
Yeah, and we are also interested in testing some of the assumptions or probabilities that underlie, the decision, for example.
And I think, go ahead.
So this is part of this question is, since we have a 4-year implementation of the change in the drawdown, the winter drawdown,
right.
How does that affect?
Well, we will not be able to test the winter drawdown during this 2-year evaluation period.
All right, then that brings me to my second question, which is it affects the winter drawdown decision, page 21, about 2/3 of the way down. Dee-Ann also finds, this is a really important paragraph to me. And I hope that,
Did you say page 21?
21, mm-hmm. And I hope that this really, is the beginning of what I hope to be a big partnership. It says, develop an approach to evaluate water quality and environmental impacts of reduced drawdowns to assist with long-term assessment and management decisions. My question has to do with what is management? What does that mean?
It's the decision.
This is the decision about drawdown, the winter drawdown.
I'll let you.
Fifth paragraph.
Why don't you address that?
Yeah, management decisions is management of the water levels of the lake. So how do you, if you're going to assess how you're going to do your drawdowns, how is it that you're actually going to implement those, and that's operating the dams? I think management decisions is management of the whole watershed and releases from Pawtuckaway Lake, but also how are you actually going to do that?
Okay, so when it says management decisions, it's not just talking about the drawdown.
I think that's true. I think managing the whole system.
Right, it
Okay.
is.
It's
Yes.
talking about
The whole shebang.
plan. Okay, well, that's great.
And I guess what I would offer is that we don't have a complete plan of evaluation yet.
Oh, we'll help you.
And that's one of the things that I'm hoping to help you
We
with.
will. We're
Absolutely.
eager to do that.
Right, because I think determining the metrics of success here are very, very important to us. And, and you'll show up in 2 years at the legislature when this plan comes around. And there'll be a public meeting of some sort with the legislators. And you'll want to have metrics that you have that would mean success to you. And if we're not reporting on those, then we're not going to be speaking anywhere near the same language. We may come to very different conclusions, but at least we should be speaking the same language as we get to that point. And so, yeah, absolutely. We really want to have a group of folks that will help us to determine what does that monitoring and assessment look like? How do we know what success would look like? At what point along this should we be changing direction? If we're going in a wrong direction?
Can adjustments
Oh,
be made,
absolutely.
for example, if
Right.
certain assumptions turn out not to
Absolutely.
improve, which is what we would like to test.
Absolutely, me too.
And that's where the adaptive management discussion in the water management plan was also addressing things that if you think this is going to happen in this direction, but it suddenly veers off dramatically, and we don't want to continue going in this direction, we want to keep it going in the right direction, what do we need to do to adjust?
Oh, we'd be happy to help you with that.
Right.
So we've been talking about that. And we talked about, I've been discussing with some folks, we had a PLAA, I had a meeting, and about 25 people come and discuss some of these points and read the plan and so forth. And we talked about appealing the current order of decision, what that involved and so forth. But we thought it might be easier, because we still have the appeal period going to September 29th, but it might be easier if we all agree to modify certain aspects of the order and or add an addendum or an appendix that might include some more formal points. For example, Pam, we kept hearing about the pilot program, which I think was referring to the whole Lamprey plan. I like the idea of it because it has, pilot programs have inherent in them what's the word, Pam? Adaptive management aspects of it. So in that spirit, we're going to request, or I'm going to request, I'm not going to be the requester, I'm requesting an addendum or an appendix be included that includes the following. As referenced on page 21, paragraph 5, which Pam just quoted, the town of Nottingham, Pawtuckaway Lake Improvement Association, and the NHDES form a performance partnership agreement. We actually have an agreement. And work together to evaluate water quality and environmental impacts of the reduced drawdown. Under this agreement, the parties will work closely during the 4-year phase-in period to evaluate the levels of phosphorus in the lake as a result of the decrease in drawdown. And Ted, you've already mentioned that was part of your year-round plan to do that. To evaluate the effectiveness of the increase in flowage, as referenced on page 21, paragraph 4, the reference to, and this was the part of the plan that I really liked, 70% of the drawdown will come from Drowns Dam. It's in the dam management plan itself. The parties will create and approve a plan by October 15th, 2013, before this year's drawdown, to establish a detailed plan to start the drawdown from Drowns Dam and to conduct the drawdown in such a way as to more rapidly evacuate water from the north end, where all the phosphorus is. Additional plans for the later refill of the north end shall allow more significant outflow even during the fill-up period, since most phosphorus productive tributaries are located in this vicinity. The effectiveness of this plan will be evaluated with periodic testing of phosphorus levels contained in the plan conducted by the PLIA with the DES collaboration. A possible byproduct of this increased northern flow, by the way, may be to increase the flush of not yet rooted invasives from the north end. To provide details of the provide details of the evaluation process plan for the promise to, quote, continue to evaluate, unquote, release conditions. To that end, New Hampshire DES will provide a written notice to the parties 48 hours prior to any emergency release, indicating that the threshold conditions have been met. You have discussed that tonight, by the way, so I was glad to see that. That we'll know that it's coming. It's not a surprise that you're going to be doing a pulse release. At least 48 hours prior to an emergency release, indicating that the threshold conditions have been met, and if they sustain for another 2 days, because I think there's like a 8 or 10 day period by which low flows have to be sustained before you pull the trigger in the plan. If sustained for the qualifying period, then the DES will conduct the release. The parties will plan 2 release tests, pulse tests, this is a request, to establish CFS flows. This year we'd like to see a test. We did 2 tests last year, one at minus 4.8 and one at minus 5.5. We discovered that at minus 4.8, we definitely meet the endpoints. We discovered at minus 5.5, we don't meet the endpoints. That still leaves 0.7 feet of where is the optimum position. And as you know, I argued a lot for that last year, but unfortunately, we were sort of too far gone to get that going. Parties will plan 2 release tests this year to establish CFS flow levels, one at -5 foot level and the other at the -5.25 foot level, to see if the endpoint of 65 CFS is achieved with a lesser drawdown than the -4.8. It could be done at -5. We could satisfy more of a flush combined with the Drowns Dam plan, and at the same time meet the conditions that you need downriver. Greater draw, yeah. We don't know. There's still a little bit of an unknown there. I thought a little more science might go a long way to making the point. With the spring refill of the lake now beginning from an increased volume level, we're no longer refilling from 7 or 6.5 or 6 feet. We're refilling 4 years from now at -4.8. When will we start refilling in the spring? You don't want to start refilling in January if you're already at 4.8, because it brings more risk to property damage, which of course we're all interested in minimizing. To provide details of how the S shall monitor, you answered that one, shall monitor UNH Durham to allow any winter releases to pass over Wiswall Dam. You answered that question. To begin the promised plant species survey. Apparently you're just starting that now. Thank you. You mentioned it in the decision. It says that you will do this. It's actually on page 9. You're going to do a plant species survey to establish a baseline for changes to decrease drawdown. At our meeting, it was indicated that plant variety is very important. It's very healthy to a watershed. And you also referenced studies that showed that during drawdowns, when there's significant drawdown, some plants are replaced by other plants, and those other plants are hardier to weeding up a lake, if you will. They're hardier to do it because they survive the winter, whereas the other ones don't survive the winter. So you've indicated tonight that you've started that. The decision indicates that it's been done, so we'll allow that it's been started. We didn't know about it until you mentioned it, that it actually had been started until tonight. Plant diversity is important. And there will be a provision in this PPA to allow for adaptive management, for adjustments to the plan management to respond to the results of any testing on measurements. There's also a request in here. I'm going to give this to you so we can have it. And it's just there's a request for clarification, or at least provide more reference to some of the claims that are made in here. That, well, we have evidence that, or our research, we've come to the conclusion based on research and so forth, but it's not always referenced in the footnotes. We'd like to see that, because all of this is becoming a great baseline. And not only just for Pawtuckaway, but for other places. The water issue is not going away anywhere. West of the Mississippi, it's an enormous political problem. Everybody seen Chinatown? Anyway. One other thing that I would like to see in any amended version. Paragraph 2, page 21. I'd like to see it removed from the decision. It's a little bit veiled, but what it says basically is it's a decision regarding boat docks. The finding states, in my opinion, it says findings. The findings are erroneous because it uses the most current statute about boat docks. Is applied to all docks on the lake. So therefore, it says that all docks must be seasonal. Most of them must be seasonal. It's a nice catch-all. It's applied to all docks, and furthermore, it terms them, most of them, as seasonal, where many of them were in place before there was even dock regulation existing in New Hampshire law. We don't know which ones they are. You don't know which ones they are. I've researched septics on the lake for many years, and it's still unclear who has permits and who doesn't, because until 1992, there were only paper records kept, and they were not kept all that well. They're trying now to put things online, and they're really doing a good job with current standards.
page 12 says, docks on Pawtuckaway Lake are seasonal docks. Where does that come from?
Are,
What the heck?
are, not some.
Docks on Pawtuckaway
few.
Lake are, yeah, but where does that come from? Who says the docks on the lake are seasonal docks? I mean, this is news to us.
So the paragraph, so
So
the
we wanna know.
objection to the way of the wording in all of these places indicates, it actually memorializes in a decision that everybody will look back on, that a condition is true, and it's not true. And it's offensive, and I'd like to see it removed. Those are my comments.
All right, moving, oh, thank you. I hope you're sending me this electronically.
I am. I just wanted it in the record of any record.
Tom, can you make sure we get a copy?
You betcha.
Thank you.
Okay, back around, yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry, did I miss you? We'll come back.
Okay, the UNH report says 25% of the docks will be impacted. Can we get a copy of the report and can you see what it is? Because, you know, people theoretically will have, I'm sure they must say which docks are gonna be impacted if they come up with a number.
It was a sampling, it wasn't an account.
Yeah, it was the southern end of the lake, and it was a list of count of docks and the depths that were off the end of the dock, so it was fairly rudimentary.
So is there any plan, was there an environmental impact statement done along with your report or your plan? Unfortunately, I'm new to Pawtuckaway, so I'm a little bit behind on some things, so to determine that there is gonna be an impact to these docks and what's gonna happen to them, and is there any assistance plan or expedited permitting or anything for people to modify their docks if they have to, or if there's any ice damage that results as a result of this activity?
I think what we should probably do is, again, one of the things that we're gonna be able to do is to implement this over a 4-year time period. And we'll be able to stop the drawdown at 4.8 feet each year. So individual dock owners need to go out and determine
Not
whether
every year,
or
we're
not.
not gonna get down to 4.8 until 4 years from now.
No, we're gonna test
No,
it
no.
every year.
We're gonna test it every year.
No, we're not gonna.
We're gonna go past, we're gonna go way past 4.8.
All right, wait.
All right, I'm sorry.
We're gonna keep on going. So we're gonna get to 4.8 and we're gonna stop.
Yeah. You go on,
Pause.
measure.
We're gonna take the positive refreshes.
Take pictures?
And then people need to go and look at their dock and see whether or not you would actually be impacted. And then what I think that would be helpful is for us to bring out to a meeting here would be somebody from our wetlands permitting program to talk about this issue about, seasonal docks, not seasonal docks, whether or not you need a permit, whether you don't need a permit, what do you need a permit for? If you work in the dry, do you need a permit to modify this thing? These are all the questions that I am not even going to attempt to answer because it's not my program and I don't know the ins and outs of it. But that is something that I think that we should probably do at some point after you've again had an opportunity to go out and see, does this affect your particular piece of property?
Just for clarity, most states, because I came out of New York and New York was developing a dock permitting, and I know a lot of the New England was starting to try to use the same information. All of that would be relatively new, but I think the thing that Tom mentioned is most of these docks are grandfathered in from long before that, so anything that's new and current probably doesn't apply to most of them.
This grandfathering issue is one that we would have to address, I think, with our Wetlands Bureau and let them explain how they interpret that.
Do you know where that statement came from?
I don't know.
It's
Yeah,
in
they
here twice.
came, the reference to the docks on Pawtuckaway, right? The beginning of the sentence is, except in the case of permanent docks, for which a permit is required, docks on Pawtuckaway Lake are seasonal docks. That came from Dale Kierstead, who is our docks guy.
And they are now required. But prior to 1972, there was no regulation that required them. And Pawtuckaway has been a populated recreational lake since they stopped taking all the water. I mean, people were here in the 30s, and there's docks from that point. My point being is that you can't make a blanket statement about the docks, and this is the regulation, and it applies to all the docks now, when the regulation that was in place at the time of the dock was installed is the one that's supposed to be.
This sounds like what you're looking for, some clarity on that. We'll have to go to
It
our.
does have something to do with how it's been improved over time.
How will you let us know when we've reached that 2-week or 1-week trial so that everybody can be notified?
How would you like to be notified?
Tell Tom and.
You know,
Who here?
There's the town,
right.
there's you, and there's us, and this is gonna be, these are the parties to the PPA, and the PPA will set up a notification, just like every good contract does. It says, here's the service address, here's the notifying party, here's how they do it, and after that, each of those parties is responsible for dissemination among the people, the stakeholders that they represent.
Also, just if I can get a raise of hands, how many people here got an individual email from Wayne letting you know about this meeting tonight? Just the two of you?
I got one. And how many people got one from Pam or the
You said
PLIA? That's better. So this is our hands. This is the people that got it from our email chain. So we would be happy when that time comes to share, but not before, but to share that, to coordinate that list distribution. Because most people got notified.
Absolutely. All right, so that's how we'll do it. However you want to do it is how we'll do it.
There'll be a service procedure. That's how we'll do it.
Okay. Sir.
Yeah, what are you doing to the?
Sorry, I keep forgetting you. I'm so sorry.
I'm still on the roll here.
We're coming
What
back.
are you doing to decrease phosphorus inputs into the lake? Is that addressed at all?
So, I think that this is an interesting subject. Certainly there have been some projects that we've worked on with the PLIA. I believe that there's been some 319 funds that have been spent to try to clean up some of this. There is an interest, I think you should talk to Tom. I think he's got some interesting ideas about what else can be done. One of the things that we're seeing kind of latent sources of phosphorus that are out there, that have been there, that used to have farms, used to have active things going on. No longer do, but the soils are essentially saturated with phosphorus. And so what is the problem with that is you can't just go tell somebody to stop fertilizing or something along those lines. This is going to be a very long process whereby over time, hopefully with less stuff coming onto the land, that these systems will flush themselves through. And so, unfortunately, there isn't, at this moment, in terms of traditional best management practices that would reduce phosphorus, there's still, anybody who's got a gravel driveway, if any of that gravel is becoming mobilized and soil is becoming mobilized and headed towards the lake, that gravel is laden with phosphorus. So if you see a road, one of your town roads, one of your association roads, one of your private roads, that's one of the major sources of phosphorus. If your septic system is not functioning well, that's a major source of phosphorus. If you're using, there are still a few lawn fertilizers on the market that have a phosphorus component. I would hope that you're banning them from your particular garage. So, there are some things that you can be doing around your lake, but to some extent, this is a problem of latent phosphorus in the system. Yes, sir.
Your system, it sounds like part of your plan relies on the USGS gauge in Newmarket.
Yes, it does.
And if the government pulls the funds from that plan, which there has been some thought of, do you have an alternate plan?
We do not.
There we go.
You better start taking up the collection.
Or you might want to send a letter to your legislator.
Yeah.
Saying how important it is to
Saying-
have data.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem. I just went to a meeting with my counterparts from all of the states in the Long Island Sound watershed, which includes New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire. And one of the big issues at that meeting was the loss of USGS gauges. We're slowly eroding our basic science gathering capacity with the loss of those gauges. It's hard for Jim to do his job in terms of protecting public safety without those gauges. And it's hard for us to do other kinds of scientific endeavors without them.
I don't know if they're gonna pull funding from all the gauges, but the one that I know of is Raymond.
The Raymond Gage and Lamprey?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yes. $12,000 a year. That's what it costs. $12,000
Per gauge?
Per gauge. per gauge. Per year.
Got it.
Are we slowing down? We still raring to go? Yeah.
One more question. You mentioned that 15% of the flow, the lampreys from Mendham's in Pawtuckaway.
The watershed that feeds into
Watershed.
Lamprey, yeah.
Why was Pawtuckaway chosen instead of Mendham's?
Both were chosen. Mendham's is also part of the plan.
It is.
Yes, it is, except for the winter, because the gates don't. It has gates, and those there was concern about those gates breaking in the winter.
All right. I thought that was the choice one or the other.
It's both. We're kind of towards the end of our appointed hour, 2 hours, and I'm willing to stay behind if people have individual questions for a little bit, and you are free to please email me, let me know. I will be back in touch with you all to make sure that you're notified of where we go from here, and I look forward to having some additional conversations related to ideas that came up tonight.
I just have one follow-up question too. So Tom is going to send you the information that the PLIA came up with last weekend.
That's basically what's in that.
Right, so when do we know whether or not you accept those changes and stuff?
So
Well, I believe that this. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this is above my labor grade.
Well, right, but we have basically 2 weeks. If we're going
to either challenge or
Yes,
agree.
I will have to go have a conversation with senior leadership at DES, hopefully as early as tomorrow.
My phone number's on it.
And we will, and we'll have a chat about where we want to go with this, and we'll probably need to set up a little meeting.
Also, Ted, if I had, one thing to say about the report was that on page 12, there were representatives from many groups that were included in commenting on this. And the town of Nottingham was not one of those groups that had representatives. So in the future.
At the meeting?
At
Big
the-
meeting at the DES?
Several people were, DES had made significant effort to involve interested parties for development and review of the draft Lake River Management Plan and to provide opportunities for public comment. A Pawtuckaway Lake Improvement Association representative was a charter and active member of the state group.
That was Therese.
Yeah, we were not there.
The town was not doing that.
Right, and
And,
so in
this-
the future.
and that was in the rules, I think, about who was in that.
The legislature defined who was going to be, what groups of people were going to be included in that.
And the
group.
municipalities were not held?
No, they had municipalities in the designated river reach. Nottingham is above the designated river reach. The legislature told us who was going to be in that group, and they were public meetings that were open to anybody. We did send notices to the towns in the watershed.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So that's why you weren't on the membership.
Yeah, so it's easy to be included in future discussion of some kind.
The WAMPAC group, we're sort of thinking about how to best be able to utilize that group and how to best make sure that people know that things are
You
going on.
definitely need to include the municipality.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole municipality is essential.
Yeah.
I'm ready now.